The Hayes mansion stood like a silent fortress on the edge of the city, its marble floors gleaming, chandeliers sparkling, and endless corridors echoing with emptiness. From the outside, it was the picture of wealth, but inside it felt more like a gilded cage. Upstairs, in a room larger than most people's entire homes, Emma lay curled beneath satin sheets. The little girl's face was pale, her lips dry, and her small chest rose with difficulty. Toys filled the room, dolls with silk dresses, stuffed animals imported from Europe, and even a golden rocking horse. Yet none of them were touched. They sat abandoned, gathering dust, because Emma no longer had the strength to play. Her nurse had stepped out hours ago, and the house staff tiptoed around her door as if her sickness were contagious. They whispered about her condition but avoided getting involved, each secretly fearing that if anything happened to the CEO's daughter, blame would fall upon them. Victoria Hayes, her mother, loved Emma fiercely but was torn by the iron chains of her position. Meetings, phone calls, negotiations, she was trapped in a storm of responsibilities that never allowed her to simply sit beside her child for long. She promised Emma she'd return early, but those promises always dissolved into late nights at the office. The mansion felt colder without her presence. For Emma, loneliness was far more painful than the fever that burned through her body. She turned her fragile face toward the window, watching raindrops streak down the glass. Her small hands reached weakly for her stuffed rabbit, pulling it close to her chest. No doctor stayed long, no servant lingered, no friend visited. In that vast and wealthy house, Emma's coughs and sighs went unheard. No one truly cared. And yet, somewhere in the restless city outside those gates, fate was preparing to send someone who would change that forever. The city streets were alive with noise and chaos, horns blaring, people rushing, neon lights flickering above cracked sidewalks. In the middle of it all rode Miles Carter, a man worn down by life but unbroken in spirit. His delivery bag bounced against his back as he weaved his motorcycle through traffic, rain splashing across his jacket. Miles wasn't just another delivery driver. He was a man carrying the weight of responsibility far heavier than the crates of groceries or parcels he transported every day. At home, a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights, his 8-year-old daughter Lily waited for him. She was his anchor, his reason to keep pushing forward when the world seemed determined to grind him down. Life had not been kind to Miles. His wife had left years ago, unable to handle the struggles of poverty. She had walked away from both him and Lily, leaving Miles to pick up the shattered pieces of their little world alone. Since then, he worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, often going without sleep just to keep food on the table and his daughter in school. Despite his exhaustion, Miles carried himself with quiet dignity. He never complained, never asked for pity. When customers barked at him for being a few minutes late, he lowered his head and apologized. When his paycheck barely covered rent, he found a way to stretch every dollar. But what made him different from so many others was his heart. Even after the longest shifts, Miles always saved his last smile for Lily. At night, they would sit on their worn-out sofa, her tiny head resting on his arm as he told her stories about heroes who rose from nothing, about knights who fought with honor, about fathers who would do anything for their daughters. He never imagined he would become one of those heroes himself. To him, he was just a delivery man, invisible to the powerful and forgotten by the wealthy. And yet, fate was already steering him toward the mansion where a pale little girl lay waiting for a miracle. The storm rolled over the city with furious strength. Rain hammered against rooftops, flooding the streets, while the sky split open with the growl of thunder. Miles hunched his shoulders against the downpour, clutching a package under his jacket as he sprinted up the marble steps of the Hayes mansion. His clothes clung to his skin, his boots dripping with water, but he didn't care. A job was a job, and this delivery was his last stop of the day. The massive front doors creaked open, and a maid with trembling hands accepted the parcel. But instead of shutting the door as usual, she froze, her face pale. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. "Sir, please, help," she whispered desperately, her voice shaking. Miles frowned, confused. "What's wrong?" She collapsed. "Miss Emma, the child. Nobody knows what to do." Without waiting for permission, Miles stepped inside. The warmth of the mansion hit him, but so did the chaos. The butler wrung his hands nervously, the chauffeur argued with a nurse, and servants whispered in frightened circles. Everyone was panicking, but no one was moving. "Somebody call an ambulance," Miles shouted. "We already tried, traffic is blocked because of the storm," the maid cried. His eyes darted toward the grand staircase, where he caught sight of a tiny figure lying limp in the arms of another maid. Emma's face was ghostly pale, beads of sweat trickling down her temples. Her chest rose shallowly, her breath ragged. Miles didn't think twice. He bounded up the stairs, scooped the child gently into his arms, and pressed her against his chest. She was feather-light, frighteningly fragile. "Out of the way," he barked. His voice held no hesitation, no doubt. The staff gasped, some protesting, but Miles ignored them. He threw his jacket around Emma to shield her from the rain and pushed through the mansion doors. Outside, the storm howled. His motorcycle stood at the curb, rainwater streaming over its seat. Clutching Emma close, he swung one leg over and started the engine. The bike roared to life, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. As thunder cracked above and lightning lit the sky, Miles tightened his grip around the unconscious child. "Hang on, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low but fierce. "I'll get you there, I promise." And with that, he sped into the storm, wheels splashing through water, his figure vanishing into the night like a lone soldier racing against time itself. Victoria Hayes stormed into the hospital corridor, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She was drenched, her perfectly styled hair clinging to her face, her designer coat dripping with rain. The CEO who usually commanded boardrooms with icy confidence looked nothing like the woman who now clutched her purse as if it were a lifeline. "Emma," she cried, her voice cracking. She rushed toward the emergency ward, but a nurse held up a hand. "Please, ma'am, you need to calm down. The doctors are working." Her heart hammered in her chest as she pressed against the glass window, eyes fixed on the fragile figure of her daughter. Emma lay under white sheets, a mask covering her nose, monitors beeping in steady rhythms. For a terrifying second, Victoria couldn't breathe. The doctor finally stepped out, pulling down his mask. "Mrs. Hayes, your daughter is stable now," he said gently. "If she had arrived even 30 minutes later, I'm afraid we wouldn't be having this conversation." The word struck like a dagger. 30 minutes. That was all that stood between life and death. And yet, when Emma had needed her most, Victoria had been sitting in a boardroom, arguing over profit margins. Tears blurred her vision. She lowered her head into her hands, her voice trembling. "My baby, I wasn't there. I wasn't there for her. Don't thank us," the doctor said, glancing toward the far end of the hall. "Thank the man who brought her." Victoria lifted her gaze. At the edge of the waiting area sat Miles, soaked to the bone, his jacket still dripping rainwater onto the tiles. His arms were wrapped around his own little girl, Lily, who leaned sleepily against his chest. He wasn't looking for attention, wasn't asking for gratitude, just holding his daughter as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Victoria's breath caught. She recognized him faintly, the delivery man she had seen at her mansion before. But tonight, he was no delivery man. He was the reason her daughter was alive. For the first time in years, Victoria Hayes felt her world tilt. None of her wealth, none of her staff, none of her polished connections had acted. Only a stranger with nothing but courage had carried her child through the storm. Her heels clicked softly as she approached him. Miles lifted his tired eyes to meet hers. For a moment, time froze, the powerful CEO and the struggling delivery driver, two lives that should never have crossed, bound together now by a fragile little girl's breath. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved my daughter." Miles gave a tired half-smile and shook his head. "I just did what anyone should have done." But Victoria knew the truth. No one else had. The days following Emma's hospitalization unfolded like a slow sunrise after a storm. She grew stronger little by little, her cheeks gaining color, her laughter returning in soft ripples that filled the once sterile hospital room. But her healing wasn't only due to medicine, it was the company she kept. For the first time in years, Emma had a real friend. Lily, with her boundless curiosity and bright smile, quickly turned the hospital into a playground. She showed Emma how to fold paper cranes from scrap notepaper, how to draw little flowers on IV tapes, and even taught her silly songs that made the nurses chuckle as they passed by. "Your turn," Lily giggled one afternoon, handing Emma a crayon. Emma's hands trembled at first, weak from fever, but she steadied them and slowly colored in the shape of a sun. Her face lit up in pride. Watching from the doorway, Victoria's chest tightened. She had given Emma every luxury money could buy, yet she had never seen her daughter so alive, so happy, as when she was sitting cross-legged beside a girl from a completely different world. And then her eyes shifted to Miles. He wasn't dressed in a suit or polished shoes, but in a simple faded shirt and worn jeans. He sat on the edge of the bed, quietly peeling an apple with careful hands. There was no grand gesture, no need for attention, just a father who wanted his daughter to eat something fresh after a long day. Victoria found herself watching him too long. She noticed the way he glanced at Lily every few seconds, making sure she was safe. She noticed the deep lines of exhaustion etched into his face, and yet how gentle his expression became whenever he looked at his child. It was a kind of devotion she had never witnessed in her world of calculated business deals and empty compliments. Later that evening, when the children were asleep, Victoria sat beside him in the dimly lit waiting area. For a moment, neither spoke, the quiet filled only by the distant beeping of machines. "You could have walked away that night," she said finally, her voice low. "No one expected you to risk yourself. Why did you?" Miles leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "Because she's a little girl. Because she needed someone. I've got a daughter too. I know what it's like to be afraid you'll lose the most important person in your life." Victoria's throat tightened. The honesty in his tone cut deeper than any polished words she had heard in years. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was just telling the truth. For the first time, she didn't feel like a CEO talking to a delivery man. She felt like a mother speaking to a father. Two people, both carrying scars, both holding onto the same fragile hope, to protect their daughters. And in that shared silence, something unfamiliar stirred in her heart. Respect, gratitude, and perhaps, the faintest spark of something more. Weeks passed, and the storm that had once threatened to steal a child's life faded into memory. Emma returned home, her cheeks rosy, her laughter echoing through the grand halls of the mansion. But something had changed within those walls. The loneliness that once clung to the air like dust no longer lingered, for the mansion now saw frequent visitors, Miles and Lily. What began as short hospital visits had turned into shared dinners at the Hayes estate, afternoons in the garden, and evenings when the two girls sprawled across the living room floor, giggling as they braided each other's hair. One such evening, Victoria stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Emma and Lily were busy building a castle out of blocks, arguing good-naturedly about who would be the princess and who would be the knight. Their laughter rang like bells, filling the mansion with a warmth it had never known. Her gaze drifted to Miles, who was crouched beside the girls, pretending to be a dragon with a growl so exaggerated that both children shrieked with laughter. His hair was mussed, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face relaxed in a way that made him look younger, freer. Victoria's lips curved into a smile she didn't even realize she was wearing. For years, she had thought power, wealth, and control were the things that protected her daughter. But in truth, it was this man, this ordinary man, whose courage and compassion had brought Emma back to life. Later, when the girls were asleep, Victoria walked Miles out to the garden. The night air was cool, the sky a deep velvet scattered with stars. For a long moment, they said nothing. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was steady, like the calm after a storm. "You've given my daughter more than I ever could," Victoria said softly, her voice trembling with honesty. "Not just her life, but joy, friendship, love." She hesitated, her hands twisting together. "And you've given me something too. A reminder of what truly matters." Miles shifted, uncertain, as if the weight of her words was too heavy for him. "I didn't do anything special," he murmured. "I just cared." Victoria stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "And no one else did." For the first time, Miles saw not the powerful CEO, not the untouchable woman from the newspapers, but just a mother with tears in her eyes. A woman who, like him, had carried loneliness far too long. Their gazes locked. Neither spoke, yet everything was said in that silence, the gratitude, the respect, the pull of something deeper forming between them. Lily's sleepy voice broke the moment as she wandered out, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, can we stay a little longer?" Emma followed behind, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Please," she added, looking up at her mother with hopeful eyes. Victoria and Miles exchanged a glance. And in that shared look, something shifted, as natural as breathing. Love had not arrived with fireworks or declarations. It had crept in quietly, through shared laughter, through children's smiles, through the courage of one stormy night. And as the two little girls slipped their hands into their parents' palms, it was clear. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new one.